I hereby call to order the Village of Riverside Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. Ann, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Marhol?
Here.
Commissioner Miller? Here. Commissioner Matthews?
Here.
Commissioner Braun? Here. Chairperson Hennigan?
Here. We have a quorum. Our first item is approval of the regular meeting minutes of November 29th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Oh, sorry.
I'll second.
Moved and second. Does anyone have any changes?
This includes the changes today.
That'll be for the next one.
January.
Oh, that's for the next one. Oh,
Yes.
this was January, okay.
Yeah. Ann, please call the roll.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews?
Aye.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Aye. Motion is approved. Next, the regular meeting minutes of January 24th, 2024. Commissioner Miller has requested a change to the minutes, which Ann has printed out for all of us. It's highlighted, and this reflects the updated language there. So if there's a motion, it should include this change.
I move to approve.
Second.
Anyone have,
With changes.
does anyone have any additional changes? Ann, please call the roll.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews?
Aye.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Aye. Motion passes. I see no one present who could speak about any items not on the agenda, which takes us to the village liaison report. Ann.
Sure. The village board will consider the feather sign ordinance during their March 21st meeting. That's the only note that I have.
Thank you very much. Next up is our public hearing, PZ 24-0001, a text amendment for cannabis dispensary operating hours. This is a public hearing to consider an application from the Village of Riverside to review and consider various changes to the standards for adult-use cannabis business establishments and medical cannabis dispensing organizations as set forth in the Riverside zoning ordinance. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Landmark on February 7th, 2024, and will be marked as an exhibit. The remaining application materials will be marked as a second exhibit. Is there a motion to accept the exhibits?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Let's see, as the village is the petitioner in this case, Ann, can you
Yes.
take it away?
Thank you very much. The village's zoning code provides the standards for cannabis dispensaries, whereas the state law allows dispensaries to operate from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. The village's zoning code limits their operating hours from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. And just a note in the staff memo, there's a typo that misstates that the state allows dispensaries to open at 8 a.m. That's incorrect. It's 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. is what the state allows. The village received a request from Starbucks Dispensary to change the zoning code so that their operating hours can be 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., which would allow them to open an hour earlier. Currently, they're open from 9 to 10 p.m. Starbucks reported that the sales between 8 and 9 a.m. at their Burbank facility can total $2,000 to $3,000, and apparently this is a popular time for seniors and those on their way to work to shop. The original intention behind the village selecting 9 a.m. as the opening time was to limit dispensaries' operations from affecting neighboring properties. The village code includes some restriction on other types of businesses' operating hours, most notably the sale of liquor, which varies from 9 or 11 a.m. as a starting point to 6 or 11 or 12 p.m. depending on the type of license. When this issue was discussed during the January 18th Board of Trustees meeting, Trustee Mateo asked if the village had received any complaints about the dispensary's operations. The only complaint that the village received is that occasionally some vehicles exit the dispensary and turn left to head west on Berkeley Road, headed to Long Common Road, presumably. And the village has been working with residents of this area for a number of years to reduce the number of vehicles traveling from Harlem Avenue to Long Common through Berkeley and Bird roads. The village installed traffic control signs, which are shown in the agenda materials, to discourage that traffic. Between the signs and other enforcement efforts by the police department, Public Safety Director Buckley reported that neighbors have reported that a notable decrease in that through traffic in that area. In fact, after that meeting on January 18th, an additional sign was added to the exit of Starbucks with a no left turn. Just a note that Starbucks is the only cannabis dispensary in Riverside, but any other dispensaries were to open, they would be limited to the B1C and B1 TOD districts, which you can see in the zoning maps that I provided at your seats. So there's a few areas. B1C is divided into north and south. As you can see on the first map, or the first map shows the north area, which includes the current location of Starbuds. There's a few properties there. B1TC is along Harlem Avenue with a couple of properties onto Burlington, but the rest of Burlington is the B1TC, so not B1TOD, just to clarify. And then in the third map, it shows the southern area of the B1C district. And just a note that dispensaries are permitted by right in those districts if they meet the standards in the village zoning code. I checked the operating hours of a few dispensaries nearby. Within between a 10 and 20-minute drive, there is one in Broadview, which is open from 9 to 9, one in Hodgkins, which is open from 9 to 9 or 10 o'clock on most days and from 10 to 6 on Sundays. There's the one in Oak Park is open from 11 to 7. And there's one in Westchester, which is open 7 to 9 on weekdays and 8 to 8 or 9 on weekends. It's kind of a range.
And then you said, sorry, may I?
No, please.
You said that their Berkeley location opens at 8,
It does.
and that's what they're basing their theory of lost revenue on,
That's exactly correct.
and not necessarily noting that it's possible that some of those earlier sales that they think they're missing out on are simply made after, say, at 10 o'clock.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And
And
are those daily sales or?
Yes.
Okay.
And my understanding, what I was reported is that we cannot verify their sales information. That's privileged information that we cannot be provided and that we can't share with the public. So that information was provided to us by Starbuds. We're assuming that that's accurate information.
So, sorry to further detail this one out. They provided that $2,000 to $3,000 range kind of as a courtesy to us to know why, but they are under no obligation to share any information, although they could if they so chose.
That is my understanding.
And since we're on this area, I just wanted to, I think what you explained here is that, and also to me in an email when I asked about this, is that Starbuds contacted someone and asked about opening 1 hour earlier at 8 a.m. And now the village board, maybe it's the village staff, I don't know which one, has decided to be the applicant to make this request. Starbuds is not the applicant, and the information they provided to us was just with a phone call or a personal contact with someone.
That is correct.
Okay. And we don't even know who it was at Starbuds,
Presumably the owner.
presumably. Okay. All right, thanks.
And that was discussed during the January 18th Board of Trustees meeting during, I believe it was a board update. President Pollock relayed that there was the request. There was a brief discussion. As I mentioned, there was a question, are there any problems with the dispensary's operation or any complaints about it? The only thing that was mentioned was traffic and the efforts that had already been made to alleviate some of that traffic. And then again, after that meeting, the additional no left turn sign was added to the Starbuds exit onto Berkeley.
Were there any comments from any residents after that additional sign was added,
I
either
haven't-
positive or negative?
I haven't heard yet. So I can't affirm the date that happened, but that was after that January 18th board meeting.
And was any, beyond the public notice of this hearing, was information sent out to the residents around the area, Bird and Berkeley, that this is being considered?
No, it wasn't. We will send out notification prior to the board meeting. So the next step in this is Preservation Commission will be weighing in. Because it's part of the zoning ordinance, Preservation Commission has to review the draft ordinance and provide commentary. Both of your recommendations from this commission and the Preservation Commission will be provided to the board. Prior to the board meeting, we'll send out notifications to the folks who have been concerned about traffic and ask if they would like to attend, if they have any commentary that they'd like to provide.
I don't know if it's appropriate now, but I have a comment with regard to the language of, not so much the time, I'm sure we're going to talk about whether or not 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in our opinions, but I have a comment, and I don't know if it's appropriate now, but I'd like to suggest a change in the language of the hours of operation in the ordinance. In the handout, it's number 9, hours of operation. Currently, it states adult use cannabis dispensing organizations shall operate only between the hours of 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. I think those hours, I don't like shall, I don't like only. I also did some research with regard to some neighboring ordinances from our neighboring towns. And North Riverside, actually, I think, states it shall be unlawful for a cannabis dispensary to open earlier than 8 a.m. They said 6. If we can insert whatever hour we determine, or close later than 10 p.m. I think that language is better. If we do have any future dispensaries in the area, I don't want them to think that they're bound to those hours or whatever hours we determine would be appropriate. You also might want to look at the North Riverside. They went on to define hours of operation shall apply to all sales, delivery, and dispensing activities for the business. And they also further elaborated, no cannabis dispensary shall permit any person other than employees to remain in the premises where cannabis is offered for sale longer than 30 minutes after the closing hour. I think those are all good points that we may want to consider if it's appropriate now, if we're talking about a text amendment. But I thought that those were, I think that that was a good thing to discuss as well.
Yeah, those all sound good to me. I don't know the Illinois state law, because state law has a lot of restrictions too. So I don't know if some of that's just a repetition of what state law says. But if
It might
not,
be.
then there are good things to add, I think.
Certainly, I think that we should get rid of the terms shall and only, and
That makes sense.
address it more of a, it's unlawful to open earlier than a certain time and close later than 10 p.m.
Personally, I would be supportive of all those changes. I think they're positive. Do we have any other questions for Ann before we close the public hearing portion? All right. In that case, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Now the floor is open for discussion on the application.
I walked in here planning on supporting it. You know, I thought, oh, that seems reasonable, but, you know, the more I think about it, I mean, okay, so given that 8 o'clock is not a standard opening time, it doesn't seem like for local, you know, they run the gamut, so I don't think there's anything there I can, you know, hitch my wagon to. And I think, you know, I don't know if this is what Joel was getting at, but I'm going to take it a step further and say, you know, okay, they told us they're missing out on sales of $2 to $3 grand in that hour. You know, yeah, maybe. I don't know. If we can't see figures, they can't prove that. Like you said, the money might come, you know, then why not open at 7? You know, can you make more then? It's just, I'm a little bit dubious of that. And then my concern about the traffic, you know, I think the village has done a really good job with ameliorating traffic concerns on Bird and Berkeley. But I'm also concerned about Harlem. I mean, that's when Harlem is really at its busiest. You're talking between really between 7:30 and 9. I mean, I commute every day, I take the train every day, and, you know, at different times, that's when Harlem is backed up. Now, I mean, you know, arguably, the same is also true at 5 o'clock, and it's open at 5, so that may not be a great, you know, argument for it, but I still kind of thinking, why add to the issue? And then, you know, finally, 8 o'clock, I mean, that's, the schools are, I think they generally open before, they're like 8:05, I think is when the schools open. But, you know, why add more traffic in a, you know, in the area, although people shouldn't be turning onto Berkeley and Bird anyway. But I kind of wish some residents had, you know, had shown up to give their opinion on this. I feel kind of weird voting on it without them, but my inclination pending this discussion is probably going to be to say no for those reasons.
I also did a little bit of research on hours, so I agree with the lack of any evidence as to whether they would make any more money or not. We have nothing in front of us. There's no evidence, there's no statement, there's no affidavit, there's nothing. Although I understand the village, for some reason, is the applicant here, so I'm not sure how to read that. But, so that's one reason why I'm not that in favor of, I don't see a good reason for doing it, basically. What is the purpose? What is the rationale? What is the benefit? Second thing, I did a little research on hours. For one thing, there are 4 businesses in the strip mall that's right next to, right adjacent. They open at 9 a.m., Salon Elevate, 10 a.m. and 10 a.m., 2 of the other businesses, and then To Your Taste opens at 11 a.m. So none of them open at 8 a.m. And then I looked at some of the Starbucks locations in other states. So they have one in Baltimore that's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. They have one in Greenwood, Mississippi that's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And another one in Mississippi, 8 to 8. Maybe that's the state law there, I don't know. And then in Oklahoma, it's 8 to 12. And then Planner Simon mentioned the other facilities. There's also some facilities, EarthMed facilities in Addison and Rosemont. They're open at 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so that's Addison and Rosemont. So yes, there seems to be a lot of variation on opening times. It's not like everyone's opened at 6 a.m. just because the state allows that. But to Commissioner Matthews' point, I think, if we make this change, well, since they could be open under state law at 6 a.m., we may be facing, you know, a future request for extended hours. So for all those reasons, I don't see under our standards for text amendments, based on what we have in front of us, a good reason to be in favor of this change.
I too, like Commissioner Matthews, walked in thinking, what's the difference between 8 and 9? Or I don't know if that, I don't mean to put words in your mouth,
right.
but, and I was willing to vote, but now I'm listening to what everyone is saying, and I don't think that the change in time really will meet our standards for a text amendment entirely. But I want to reiterate, I think that we need to amend this text. So I'm not entirely convinced to vote in favor of the 8 o'clock request.
But you would perhaps want to make a motion that we change the language, leaving it as 8 to 10? Or I'm sorry, not 9 to 10?
Yes, is that appropriate to do now?
Oh, one other thing, I just want to ask a question. So some of these shops have shorter hours on Sunday, but the one we're discussing here, they're open right now from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Sunday, is that right?
It's the same operating hours every day.
Yeah, so this would change
Sure.
Sunday hours also to 8 a.m.
Presumably, yes.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, just one more thing. What time do we allow liquor sales in the village? I know it differs, and I was looking for it just now when I came in, couldn't find it.
It depends on the license that you hold, and so trying to parse the different licenses was a little chaotic. But basically, 9 or 10 was the typical starting morning time for sales.
And is 9 the earliest by law, or could someone sell earlier? Do you know that offhand?
I don't know off the top of my head what the state law is.
Because I think at the very least, cannabis sales should comport with liquor sales. I mean, to me, that's just kind of a, you know, with hours, maybe, but I don't know, maybe not.
John, I can very easily buy into that we're talking about 2, we'll call them drugs, alcohol and cannabis. treating them equivalently is appropriate.
Yeah, but that's why I'd be curious, like, are like, let's say it's the, 7-Eleven not selling till 9 o'clock out of the goodness of their hearts, or could they be selling, like, half pints of, cheap vodka at 6 in the morning? I don't know. I mean, and if that's the case, then they're not comporting, and then we open up a whole nother can of worms, so I'm kind of reluctant to base it on that.
Well, but I'm, back to the question you just asked Ann, comporting to other village
Yeah.
rules with regards to alcohol is pretty fair.
Right.
Just-
State law allows 6 AM for cannabis, but we don't. And maybe
Right.
they allow 6 AM maybe they
Yeah.
allow 24 hours in the
Yeah.
state for liquor, I don't know.
They do.
To be
They do,
devil's
okay. I didn't know
to be devil's advocate here, though, there is an argument that there's medicinal properties with regard to the cannabis purchases, and I don't know if you have that argument with alcohol.
Right. And I think in the board meeting, there was a mention that the purported reason for asking for this was because at their Burbank facility, they're telling us, a lot of seniors and medical card users coming 8 to 9. But of course, they're not only selling to those people. And seniors might want to shop at 8, but I think they probably would be able to shop other times during the day when
Yeah.
it's not so busy.
And
So, I mean, yeah, anyway.
Perhaps arguably, the seniors are retired and they don't have, they're not
They're not
bound
going
to
to
work
work.
hours.
Yes, they're not going to work at 8 AM and trying to stop off. Okay.
So I would make a motion for a text amendment for the hours of operation to be changed to, it shall be unlawful for a cannabis dispensing organization to open earlier than 9 AM or close later than 10 PM.
I second that text change.
All right, in that case, we can go over the standards for text amendments, which is the last attachment in the memo for this item. Number 1, the extent to which the proposed amendment promotes the public health, safety, comfort, convenience, and general welfare of the village. I believe that's our intent.
I don't think it meets any of those. I mean, it promotes the convenience, but,
I
No,
think,
I
yeah,
think
it's
it
sort of,
means-
it's either neutral or it doesn't apply.
Right, yeah.
Standard is either neutral or doesn't apply.
Number 2, the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the applicant.
The applicant's the village, I don't know what the hardship is, certainly within its typical
that's an
zoning
interesting point.
standard.
I agree with that. Yeah, what is the hardship to the applicant? There's none. The only hardship to the applicant in this case would be potentially reduced tax revenues from not allowing these opening hours, but there's been no, frankly, as an aside, if the board wants to provide this to us, they should have provided us with figures on taxes. Like how much are we talking, right? I mean, how much are we gonna make out of this? I mean, we could all do the math.
Well, I asked Planner Siren about if we had any figures, and you told me that the finance director said that those could not be shared.
That's correct. Our interim
So-
finance director reported that is
Maybe even the
confidential.
village board doesn't know that, I don't know. We
Sorry,
certainly,
that which finance, what
the village
Starbucks
finance.
makes?
Our interim finance director told me
Yes.
that we could not, under penalty of law, have that information or share it.
That
I
can't-
do not understand the details. I wish I could give you
That
more.
Can't be
but-
right.
I'll be honest, and maybe I'm going to perhaps channel a little bit of John here, but that can't possibly be right because the village has access to all the sales tax records. And to be honest, if we're talking about 2,000 or 3,000, then that's, I believe, the village takes 3% of that number. So are we,
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not doing this math in my head because
Yeah.
I'm going to embarrass myself. But
So let's say 15,000 a week.
3% of $3,000 is $90. So times 7, calls maybe $700 a week, if my assumptions are correct.
Can I just ask for a clarification?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Commissioner Marhol and Commissioner Matthews with regard to the lack of evidence to support the petition of with the 8 a.m. opening. However, my motion
Right, you're absolutely
was
right.
for a text amendment to actually correct what I think is the language, the rigid language, that includes the words shall and only between the hours of 9 and 10 p.m. I did not change the hours. We're dealing with a text amendment, which I feel is correcting an ordinance that has rigid language that really would be in the public interest to correct.
Yeah, so the motion on the floor is to keep the hours as is, but alter the language in that section.
Yes, and thank you for that correction. And that's,
Yeah, we
you're
gotta-
entirely correct. And I think the issue is that we're still thinking that we're looking at a text amendment, or at least thinking about this previous text amendment that was 8 a.m. to 10. And we're no
So-
longer looking at that. We're looking at your preferred language, appropriate language.
So perhaps I should have made a motion to deny the petition first. Would that have been the correct?
We can do both.
We can do them together.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I don't want to do two of them.
the petitioner, the village came to us and asked for one thing, and we said, and we can discuss that and then say, oh, by the way, here's what we think, and it's, we're changing. I think we do both in one.
Well, I think just by adopting Commissioner Brum's proposal, it's reiterating the hours, the existing
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
So that would be fine.
For sure.
think
It's
that-
basically doing the same.
That's okay. I
So
think
we should
All right,
redo this
So we're
maybe.
comfortable
Go back to
with the
one.
motion as made and seconded, but perhaps we'll restart the discussion of the standards.
I apologize. So if we're talking about 9 till 10 with the more firm closing and opening times, then I think we are in agreement that we do promote public health, safety, et cetera. We're sticking to what we believe does that.
I agree. I think a clear statement of the law is better. It does improve public welfare and, yeah.
Thank you. Number 2, the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the applicant.
With the revised language, there is no hardship.
Number 3, the consistency of the proposed amendment with village plans.
Yes.
I think it's consistent or neutral.
Number 4, the consistency of the proposed amendment with the intent and general regulations of the zoning ordinance.
Agreed.
One sec, though. I mean, I'm not sure that your changes are fine. This is why it's getting odd, we're talking about, so I'm fully in support of
I
your changes.
apologize.
No, don't. I get it. But we're either, but I also want to point out that the change in opening hours may not be consistent with the village's zoning ordinance because of the reasons we talk about alcohol sales.
Yes, but we are not at this moment considering a change in opening hours as the motion is
Okay,
to
okay.
maintain the
Okay,
opening
okay.
hours. Number 5, whether the proposed amendment corrects an error or omission, adds clarification to existing requirements, or reflects a change in policy.
It
It very clearly
clarifies.
does that.
Clarification, yes. Number 6, that the proposed amendment will benefit the residents of the village as a whole and not just the applicant, property owners, neighbors of any property under consideration, or other special interest groups, and the extent to which the proposed use would be in the public interest and would not serve solely the interest of the applicant. This would be applicable to any future cannabis establishment as well.
Yes.
Number 7, whether the proposed amendment provides a more workable way to achieve the intent and purposes of the zoning ordinance and the village plans.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Number 8, the extent to which the proposed amendment creates nonconformities.
It does not.
Does not.
None.
And number 9, the extent to which the proposed amendment is consistent with the overall structure and organization of the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
It is consistent with that. Is there any further discussion?
No.
With that, Ann, please call the roll.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews?
Aye.
Commissioner Brum?
Aye.
And Chairperson Eddigan.
Aye. Motion passes. So the commission is a recommending body, and this application will go to the village board for a final decision after consideration by the Preservation Commission. Thank
Could I
you.
just ask a clarification question? Why does it have to go to Preservation Commission for an
Because-
hours of a dispensary that isn't in a historic building?
I understand. The, text of the, regarding the Preservation Commission's purview states that the Preservation Commission must review any amendments to the zoning ordinance. And because this is part of the zoning ordinance, they must review
Okay,
it.
so all text amendments, because that could arguably impact historic preservation of the village, something. Okay,
In
that
most
makes sense.
cases, it makes a lot more sense.
Yes. Okay.
All right, we have one item of new business, discussion regarding the status of the 2020 text amendments for front-loaded garages. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure most of you who have been on the commission for a while know much more about this than I do, but just to reiterate, we'll just do a quick rundown of the history and then review what the village board asked us to look at. So around 2017, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency and National Park Service expressed some concern about the impact of new construction, specifically front-loaded garages, on the national landmark designation of the village. So the Preservation Commission discussed that issue in August of 2017 and expressed their concern that the zoning ordinance encourages rear-loading garages, but it doesn't prohibit front-loaded garages. And although the standards intended to minimize the negative architectural impacts of front-loaded garages are in the code, they're still being built, and we're having a negative impact on the character of the village in the aggregate. So individual, one or two didn't seem to be a concern, but in aggregate, it would change the character of the village. And their objection or concern focused on the preservation of the general plan. In December of 2018, staff presented to the village board a draft ordinance amending the village code relative to garages and driveways to address these concerns. The Board of Trustees did not vote on that draft ordinance, but instead formed a garages and driveways steering committee to discuss the proposed changes. After further discussion of that steering committee and revisions, in October of 2020, staff presented to the village board an amended ordinance, which the board approved. That 2020 ordinance did not include all of the elements from the original 2018 ordinance. Some of those were left behind. So in January, staff was asked to review the 10 elements of the 2018 draft ordinance that were not included in that 2020 ordinance, list them out, and bring them to the board for discussion. And the board reviewed those amendments and directed the Planning and Zoning Commission to revisit the items not included in the 2020 ordinance because they felt there was some merit behind the items that were not included. So I included a list of those, and those were in effectively the order that they were presented in the 2018 ordinance. And most of them are individual requests, but there are some themes that I just want to mention. Building code requirements was the first topic. Separation of accessory buildings from the main structure, which is on our list to look at in 2024 as the Planning and Zoning Commission. Garage door widths, garage design requirements, how non-conforming garages are handled, standards for new garages, driveway width standards, and most importantly, incentives. And the incentives was, I think, one of the main driving issues behind the 2018 amendments. Instead of prohibiting front-loaded garages, the idea was to incentivize side or rear-loaded garages. So what I'd like to do is review the elements that were not included in that 2020 ordinance with you, discuss them, get your general feedback and input on each one, whether you think there's merit in looking at them further. And the next steps would then be for staff to break those down into chunks and bring them back to you with additional research, answering your questions and providing additional context, and then eventually putting together a recommendation to the village board on possible text amendments, including those elements. Taking a look at the memo provided, the first element included adding standards for exterior walls to the village's building code. And just a note that the village intends to update the building code standards to a more recent version of the International Building Code. So that could be included in that update. But the 2018 ordinance would have added to the code minimum fire resistance ratings and minimum fire separation distances for walls, projections, openings, and penetrations. I can't speak to why that was not included in the 2020 ordinance. I'll do additional research and bring that back to you if you feel that there's merit in including those standards if they're not going to be already included in the update to the building code.
I was going to say, can you check the IBC first and see
course.
what it says regarding those items? Because I thought we did discuss those, but
Sure.
Yes, it's my understanding that those items are included in the IRC and IBC, so that may
It
be
could have been
it
why
wasn't
they were not included in the 2020 ordinance.
and that's very possible, and that's why it's been a while, so I don't remember exactly.
Sure.
I'm not really sure about all of that, but I think what we were doing there was changing from a 10-foot distance to 3 foot, and there was some concern about, having safety.
Ensuring fire
So, yeah.
resistance for closer buildings. Yeah, and I
Because
think that's
our
baked
code
into
says
the,
something about that, or our building ordinance says something, so.
And to your point, yes, and I think that's where it's already baked in. It says
so
if
if we're
you're
going to
so
adopt
far
it-
away, then you need to be, so it's automatically adopted?
Yeah, right, okay.
that's my understanding. There could be some attached garage standard that was missing in the code that is of concern, so I can take a look at that as well. The second item is the separation of accessory structures and principal buildings. So currently, the code requires that accessory buildings must be separated from the principal building on the site by 10 feet. The 2018 recommendation was to reduce that distance to 3 feet. And again, as a reminder, this is on our list of things to consider. I believe Commissioner Marhol had mentioned that this item could be a point of discussion for the commission in 2024.
And I think that's why it's just a legacy that's kind of lingering.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to see us discuss this because I would like the separation requirements to refer to the building code requirements as opposed to having one standard in the building code and a different standard in the zoning ordinance.
Okay. And the third point, and just before we discuss this, I want to note, and I appreciate Commissioner Braun bringing this to my attention, the very last sentence on the bottom of that page contains a typo. Could not exceed, and that should be 18 feet in width. And so reviewing that, it's the standard for garage door widths. So the code currently states that all garage doors should be limited to 18 feet in width, with the exception that the front loading garages should not exceed 9 feet in width. So for example, if you had a double-loaded garage facing the street, you'd have to separate those two doors into 9 feet each instead of having an 18-foot door. The 2018 ordinance would have limited all residential garage doors to 9 feet in width, except for detached garages and rear yards and rear-loaded attached garages, which could not exceed 18 feet in width. So if you have a detached garage in the rear of the yard and then, or an attached rear-loading garage, you could do 18 feet.
I would suggest for consideration that we add side-loaded garages to that, because they're not visible from the street,
Sure.
for the most part.
Yeah, I think that one is worth discussing. I think if we do consider it, we'll need to put in a time limitation to deal with nonconformities, because if you have an existing home that was constructed with an 18-foot wide garage door, you can't easily modify that to be 9 and 9 if you were to replace it.
That's true.
Well, I think, to your point, maybe there's a better way to, number 5 kind of talks to legacy.
Yeah.
Moving on to point number 4 is the first, I believe, 2 sections that deal with garage design requirements. And so this is a difference between an encouragement and a shall. So in the current code, upper-level dormers and pitched roof elements are encouraged to de-emphasize the garage, whereas the 2018 ordinance would have stated front-loaded residential garages shall be consistent with the architecture and design of the principal building.
That one I really don't care about, honestly,
Okay.
for a few reasons. I think generally it's going to happen anyway. you know, and if somebody really wants to go out and, you know, to get some, you know, mad architect who wants to design something really, really different and cool, I mean, at a certain level, you know, this is Riverside. One of the charms of Riverside is that we don't live in a cookie cutter suburb. We don't live in a cookie cutter neighborhood. People do different things. So of all of these, this is the one that I'd be like, yeah. And I think the way it's worded now is fine, but, you know, I would not send this one back to the board if it was up to me.
The only item that I think I do like, though, is the last sentence. The where appropriate, upper-level dormers and pitched roof elements are encouraged to de-emphasize the garage. That's really the whole point of all this discussion, is the de-emphasis part.
Well, that's what it says now, so it's okay.
Oh, it does. I'm
And-
sorry.
yeah.
It absolutely does. I completely apologize.
And I think I agree with both of you you could have, I mean, I would not want us to be requiring every garage to look exactly like the house, like a mini house. I mean, that might not be good design, that might be intrusive upon someone's personal choice. There's a lot of garages that are different. I wouldn't want some Quonset hut or something either, on the sense, you know, something ridiculous, right? And then in the last sentence, where it says where appropriate, and then we pick out two kind of architectural features are encouraged. I think there could be other ways. So, and oftentimes having an upper level dormer on a front-loaded garage looks not very good. I mean, it looks, I don't know. I don't like them to begin with, but anyway, I would just be in favor of maybe when this is considered in the future, some revisiting of this language and.
Of
really-
the language of de-emphasis.
Yes, or maybe just say, should be an effort to de-emphasize without calling out two architectural elements.
I
in
can agree with
specific.
that. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, I'd agree with
Plus,
that.
not every house is going to have, it wouldn't be appropriate, because they don't have pitched roofs, or they don't have dormers anywhere else, so it just seems,
Perhaps the word shall is throwing me off in the, I do like to revisit, I would like to revisit the language to de-emphasize the look of the front-loaded garage, but to use the word shall, it sort of limits creativity
yeah.
that perhaps we as a village enjoy.
Okay. So the next standard, number 5, it has to do with existing garages, and the most important part of the section is regarding, is the last sentence of the second paragraph. It has to do with non-conforming garages, in that a front-loaded garage that was existing may be maintained or reconstructed, even in cases of demolition, in conformance with the requirements of this subsection, rather than in conformance with the requirements of not having a protruding front-loaded garage.
And this actually is probably the only item here that I can't support. I would say in the case, whatever language we have elsewhere in the code, but in the case of inadvertent demolition, like fire or storm, then you can reconstruct. But I think if you go out and you demolish a house, you don't get to put it back to that same footprint. That's not, then don't demo it.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I thought if you had a whole 100% destruction of any structure,
That we
you
had to.
can't.
Right.
You
And
don't
so
have-
I don't know
okay, that's what you're
why,
saying.
I don't
Okay.
understand why I don't understand why garages get a special carve-out in the case of
That
100%
makes sense, yes,
demolition.
yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense to me as well.
That's the whole
Yes.
point of the code, is to bring things up to, and if it's existing, if it's legacy, we
you're
let
right.
it
That's a
stay.
good
We
point.
always do. It happens all the time. But new,
Agreed.
All right. The next section is regarding new garages. So currently, the code uses the language porches or the remainder of the front facade should protrude at least 5 feet in front of garage doors. This is the preferred design, as in contrast to the required design. And the 2018 ordinance would have deleted that language and replaced it with the following, stating that front-loaded garages built after the effective date where properties where no front-loaded garages existed prior to the ordinance shall be set back a minimum of 5 feet from the furthest setback of that front building wall.
So the current code then allows the setback from a front porch, if there is a front porch, is that correct?
It allows it, it encourages it with the language should, but does
Okay.
not require it.
But so you could then, right? So if the porch is here and the wall's here, the
Yes.
setback would only have to be from the porch.
That's correct.
Whereas the previous language is from the wall.
Yes.
So this is more lenient. And with this,
Go on, sorry.
and I'm just thinking, we just had this discussion on front porches protruding into yards in certain areas. Is this gonna open up?
Well, and actually, that's why I think the existing 10-7-3A, I think we really don't want things measured from the porches. So the 2018 language is actually much better because it gets us out of, I think where you were just going is now we got to have another discussion on front porches.
I want to do that.
And I would like it to be mandatory rather than should.
Oh, yes.
It's too squishy.
No, I'm fully supporting the mandatory shall element, must.
Okay, and number 7, again, returning to design standards, but this time for side-loaded garages. The code currently has 2 design standards for side-loaded garages. They shall not protrude beyond the facade of the building by more than 5 feet. And a should, windows, doors, and roof treatments facing the street should incorporate the architectural detail expressive of the residence. And so the 2018 would have added a standard to those 2, that side-loaded garages shall be consistent with the architecture and design of the principal building. Just a note that that mirrors the language in the standards for residential detached garages, not side-loaded, which currently exists in the code but was not proposed to change in the 2018 ordinance. So for new detached garages, they shall be consistent with the architecture and design of the newly constructed principal building. So that's for a new build, not for a new garage on an existing building.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense if we require a detached garage to be consistent with the home. Why would we not want the garage that's physically part of the home to be consistent with it? Don't think it would make sense to require that of one but not the other.
All right. Point 8 is new setback and design standards for detached garages in side yards. So the current code lists the 2 standards for residential attached garage standards. The 2018 ordinance would have added a standard. In the case of detached garages on the side yard, the garage should be set back minimum of 5 feet from the furthest setback of the front building wall of the principal structure, excluding architectural elements. And then again, where appropriate, speaking to design standards. So I don't know if there's any interest in pursuing that as an additional change.
Again-
That setback for side-loaded garages. Or, excuse me, detached garages and side yards, I apologize.
Again, if we don't want to see garage doors attached to a house, we want them to be set back 5 feet. I would think we would want the same for a detached garage, just for the sake of consistency. And all of this language that we're talking about regarding design, I would just like it to be consistent throughout, from one element to another.
Sure.
Okay. And then the number 9 is new driveway width standards. So the majority of the proposed language from the 2018 ordinance, or half maybe, is currently included in the ordinance. And that is about the driveways, which are typically, or should be 10 feet wide as they approach a garage, and then can widen to the width of the garage within 20 feet of that garage. And then there's a taper area. The 2018 ordinance would have added additional language regarding detached garages in side yards, specifying that the width of the driveway approaching the garage shall only be permitted to extend for a distance of 15 feet back from the garage doors, instead of 20, which is the allowance for detached garages in rear yards. If that makes any sense. So that was not included in the current ordinance.
I mean, the 2018 ordinance is a little more specific, and I think it's always good for, drafting an ordinance to have more specificity in there, and then it's
And
less interpretation in the future.
To go with, well, maybe to add to what you're saying is, I thought we had extensive discussion about this, and honestly, I thought, well, I know we had extensive, not even thought, but I thought elements of, most of this was already in there. And so I'm just misremembering at this point, so, yes.
I agree. I thought there was something that was changed regarding the setback.
Well, I'm wondering if
Maybe
it
not.
only played into the driveway apron width,
Could be.
that's where we stopped.
Could be, yeah.
And maybe that's where I'm misremembering and thinking that apron discussion also went to the garage, face the garage. Maybe we just didn't.
I definitely remember the apron discussion. I don't remember the additional part here.
Yes, but I remember discussing this, but I.
We talked
No,
about it.
I know,
We
that's
talked
why.
about it.
So, yes, what John said. And Chairperson said.
And this one, perhaps more so than the others, would definitely benefit from an exhibit to
Yes.
help us follow what we're talking
Yes.
about here.
Understood. And the final are the bonus building coverage for new detached garages in the rear yard or rear-loaded garages. So again, instead of prohibiting front-loaded garages, trying to encourage rear-loaded or rear yard detached garages. So and just as a reminder, the zoning ordinance has limitations on building coverage. So for example, 30% is most frequently the building coverage allowance, and that is not total square footage, it is whatever the footprint of a structure over 1 foot tall is. That counts towards your building coverage. So to encourage the use of, or the construction of rear yard and rear loaded garages, the area, what the 2018 ordinance proposed was that the area of the new garage to be excluded from the building coverage calculation of a zoning lot in 3 situations that were listed. The first was for new single-family dwelling units, detached garages in the rear yard, or rear-loaded attached garages. The second is construction where an existing single-family dwelling unit is being remodeled and a detached garage in the rear yard or a rear-loaded attached garage is constructed in lieu of a previously existing attached front-loaded garage. That sounds like a very specific example. I can think of a building permit that I've just reviewed and another that came in where you have a front-loaded single door garage. And now the folks who bought the house want to basically use that as they're gonna turn it into a portico share.
Pass
So they
through.
can drive, exactly, pass through and build a detached garage in the back of the property.
Which is fairly common.
Yeah, just an example.
Well, common, we've seen it many times before.
Sure. And then the third example where a detached garage in the rear yard or rear loaded garage is added where no garage previously existed on a single-family property, and the bonus in that case should be for a maximum of 400 square feet and applies only when the new garage is the only garage on the property.
Now, this is only clarification. Listening to the village video, Trustee Marshazga made a comment I didn't quite follow, or I missed some word she said, or it wasn't picked up in the audio. Did she have an issue with the 400 square feet or suggest that that needed to be revised? And that's, I got the feeling she thought it wasn't the right number, but it was one sentence. So just clarity from the sense of what are the trustees thinking?
Sure. I'll have to get some clarity for you on that.
I did not go back and watch that sentence a second time, but
Sure.
I was confused.
I really like zoning incentives in general, so I like this idea. I don't know if 400 square feet is the right number. That's something that I think is worth talking about, what the right number is. But I would also like us to give some consideration to extending it to existing homes with a detached garage or rear-loaded garage, so that they're not, if someone were making improvements to their property, they don't decide, well, I'll just go ahead and add a front-loaded garage attached to the house because why not? I'd rather have it, and there's no benefit to doing it, to
Okay.
keeping the old one.
And everything you said, yes, the incentive is actually, that's not usually where zoning goes. It's usually more penalizing. Honestly, 400 square feet doesn't sound bad. That's 20 by 20.
That's all that I had. Again, my intention is to take your notes and break this up into sections and bring them back to you with additional research of what was discussed previously to provide context. And then we have the benefit now of approximately 5 years since this was originally brought up. And so we have the benefit of other communities have, I'm sure, made some changes in their code related to this that we can benefit from reviewing. We also have had new construction in the village, and we can bring those examples forward and use those as examples of things that you prefer
Could you?
and don't prefer.
What's been built in the last 5 years would be interesting.
So if you have any additional, if anything sprung to mind now that you'd like to include in this, I'd be happy to look into those. I'm sure as we discuss this, additional items will come up and we can add those to our discussion.
I can't think of any new item, but in the very last sentence of the document, where it does say, under number 3, the bonus shall be for a maximum of 400 square feet, and this is for, a new garage, it would seem to me that that should apply to all of these.
Well, and I think that's
Is that
what,
basically what you were saying?
that's what
I
you
mean,
were
I wasn't
saying,
following.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't
And
very clear
I
on
didn't
that.
think we intended to not apply that to other garages.
Yeah, that was
Writing
supposed to
this,
be
so
for
that's
everything.
confused, yes.
No, but you're right, it's ambiguous, so it should be clear.
It's only
for
in number
each-
3, so
Yeah,
it
it's in
doesn't
the
seem
wrong
like,
spot.
Right, it
someone
should
could
be
build
for
a
all of
massive
them, yeah.
garage in the back, it sounds like, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
Commissioner Marhol, if I could ask, I believe this jogs my memory of the trustee Marshaska's comment during the Board of Trustees meeting.
Yes.
I believe, and you can correct me if I'm off guard, or off track. I believe that she said, she was reminding the board that the board had discussed clarifying that each individual accessory building can be up to 800 square feet, where I think there was some maybe lack of clarity in the code previously.
Oh.
And so the idea was that you could now build, very clearly by code, an 800 square foot garage, rear detached garage, or, I suppose attached to your house, but that's less relevant here. But if you had an 800 square foot garage and this bonus applied to it, only 400 square feet of that 800 square feet garage bonus would apply in this
Right.
case. So perhaps that number needs to be revisited if the desire is to include the entire 800 square foot garage.
Yeah,
Fair enough, but I don't think I'd make it too, 400 square feet is about the size of one two-car garage. 800 square feet is getting into 3 and 4 car size, so.
I recall our
4.
discussion back then, part of the concern was we have many different sized lots, different
Yes.
residential districts, and an 800 square foot garage may be appropriate on a large R1AA, but we wouldn't want that in an R2 area. So we were struggling, I think, a little bit with how much should the bonus be without allowing oversized garages on small lots.
And
Maybe there's a better way to do that.
And I think, the idea of preserving open space was part of that too, that we don't want to necessarily encourage larger garages than necessary.
That sounds right to both of you.
Also because of things like stormwater movement
Exactly.
and all that, yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
all right. Anyone have any information to share?
I do not.
Okay. In that case, our next meeting will be on March 27th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.